Okay, so good morning, everybody. I do apologise for the slight delay in starting. My poor old computer is suffering a little bit. So my name's Sandy Millin. I'm the Director of Studies at another international house in Poland, in Bydgoszcz in the north. And the thing that I would like to talk about today is clearer communication. I originally designed this talk for directors of studies and teacher trainers, but I think a lot of the things in there are relevant as well. For anybody who needs to communicate with other people, basically. Sorry, could I just request that nobody annotates? I have tried to switch it off, but Luke, whoever annotated before, could you delete that annotation? I don't think I can do it at the moment. Oh yes, I can. Right. Okay, so I'm going to start off by saying that everything that I tell you today, it's kind of a lot of information, but it's all in the blog post link, which is at the side of every slide. So it doesn't, if you miss something, all of the slides are available on that blog post link. So I'll start off with some general tips then. I'll start off with the key part of communication, which is shut up and listen, and a couple of things that you can do to help you with this. So make sure that you're paying full attention when you're listening. I realise that might not be the case right now. You might be like cooking or something else, but when you're listening to people because you're trying to communicate with them, don't be doing anything else at the same time. That's something I'm still working on. Don't interrupt what the other person is saying. And the tip is like Victoria or like I'm doing now, if you put your fingers over your mouth like this, it makes it much harder to speak. So that stops you from interrupting the other person. Also think about what the other person isn't saying. So look at their body language, look at their facial expressions, listen to their tone of voice. What is behind their words as well. Okay, and now some general tips. So when you're communicating with other people, think about the medium. Is it better to speak to them through a video or maybe on the phone, or if we can, face-to-face? Is it better to send an email? Is it better to arrange a meeting for a group of people? Think about how you communicate before you decide what you're communicating. Be clear about what information doesn't exist. So, for example, when I make a timetable, I need to be very clear with teachers what information I'm still waiting for, what information I won't have for a long time. So it's not just telling them what's there, but also what's not there and perhaps why as well. With that kind of information then, be realistic about when the communication will actually happen. So if you know you're not going to get this information until next week, don't tell them that it's going to come tomorrow or later this week. That can be very frustrating for people. That's the same with students. If you're telling them when they're going to get their test results, don't tell them it's tomorrow if you know you're not going to have time to mark the test until at least Friday, for example. I think it's also important to remind people that communication is a two-way street. Remind them to help you, remind them to remind you. If you don't follow up on something, then they should remind you. Like, it's not always, like, as long as it's not all the time, it's not always your responsibility if you forget. They don't know how many hundreds of emails you get in your inbox every day. So get people to help you out. And then we all make mistakes. So if you have made a mistake in communication, if you realise that maybe something you've said has hurt somebody, or something you've said has raised their expectations that they can't get something, or you've given feedback in a negative way, for example, be open about those mistakes and apologise. Don't try and brush it under the carpet. Just acknowledge the fact, I'm really sorry. Sometimes we all make mistakes, and this is what I've learned from this situation. Tell them what you've learned and how you'll move forward, and do apologise. Okay, think about the timing of your communication. So if you send out an email to a student at 11 p.m. at night, that tells them that you're available at 11 p.m. at night. What are your working hours? What is your availability? If somebody sends you an email and you respond within a minute every time they send you an email, when you then don't respond until a day later or 2 days later, what messages are you sending out about response times? I'm not saying you should reply within a minute. I'm absolutely not saying that. But think about the messages you send and consider careful use of the schedule send function that is in most emails. So if I know that I'm writing emails late at night, then I will schedule something to send the following morning rather than that day. Yeah. As Valentina said as well, don't send messages at 2 in the morning. That doesn't send happy messages. Well, firstly, go to bed, and secondly, that's not good for the people you're writing to either. Okay, so think about your timing. Okay, if you're arranging meetings, that can be with students, it can be with parents, it can be with teachers. Here are a few things to think about. So firstly, think, is this actually a meeting or is it really an email? I think we've all sat through meetings that should actually have been written in an email instead of, information dumps, basically. And then think about, what is the meeting for? Like, what's the purpose of the meeting? And then who is the meeting really for? Does it actually need 6 people to attend it? Or is it actually only for 3 people and the other 3 people just get an email of a summary afterwards? Like, a meeting implies some level of discussion and question and answer. It's not a lecture. So think about, who is it actually for? And then go back to the previous question of, is it really an email? Once you've decided that you are having a meeting, think about, do you need to say everything in the meeting? Or are there some parts of the meeting where you can give people time to read something instead of saying it? You'll see some of that a bit later on in this presentation. Let me show you an example. This is, so when I do our staff meetings at school, I have an agenda like this. I know you can't read it, you're not supposed to be able to read it, but you can see a section at the top that has bullet points, and then everything below is kind of numbered. And the bullet points is a section that's called Please Can You? And this is stuff that I don't need to tell them, but they do need to know. So this could be in an email, but normally people have questions about 1 or 2 of those things, which is why it goes into the meeting. And I also I started this year using color coding. So if it's the second time I'm telling them something, it turns orange. And if it's the third time I'm telling them, it turns red. If it's like a general announcement that people need to know about. So you can see that from that agenda. Then if you are dumping a lot of information on people in a meeting, break it up. That's true of a lesson as well. We all know that we shouldn't be lecturing our students. So try and do something to break up the information that creates more beginnings and endings during the meeting. And that means that people are more likely to remember what you say. So I'm going to break up my info dump now and say in the chat so far, what advice would you, what makes a good meeting? What makes a bad meeting? Just while I have a drink of water. Yeah, Chris, I agree. Biscuits do help. Sadly, biscuits don't work so well on a Zoom meeting. Yeah, exactly. Interaction, so it's not an email. Yeah, not going around in circles. Yeah, exactly. When nothing's been decided. So again, with the meeting, what's it for? What are you aiming towards at the end of it? Yeah, if you laugh, it's a good meeting as well. Yeah, we don't want everyone to be depressed all the time. Yeah, so scheduling it on short notice, again, communication and collaboration and taking on ideas. Okay, good. So cool, I'm going to move on. Who said, Barbara? Yeah, Barbara said it's bad when nothing's been decided. So that's the next thing is, after the meeting, are the next steps clear? Is it clear who needs to do what and why, for example? Again, that could be coupled with an email that summarises what happened in the meeting afterwards. I think for a staff meeting as well, or with students, it's really important to include positives as well and include like thank yous, like so it's not always like the meeting isn't just telling them off basically, but like what positives have you seen? And that comes back to like Anais said as well, if you laugh, it's been a good meeting. So yeah, don't forget to include that too. Okay, so that's meetings. Okay, what about emails? Okay, it's a huge part of our lives now. So how can we improve our communication with emails? So this is a bugbear. Clear subject lines. Make it easy for people to find emails again in the future. Make it easy for people to decide whether they should open that email now or leave it for later when they actually have time to process the information. I'll show you a couple of examples of these in a minute. If you're going to use the word urgent in a subject line, only use it when it actually is urgent. Be selective about your use of that, otherwise it loses its power. I use it for if I need a reference from somebody for a teacher that I would like to start in the next week or two. But if I'm asking for a reference like in May for a teacher that's not going to start until September, that is not urgent. So be selective about that. Think about when you're sending information, is this one big email? Can you put everything into one email? Or is it lots of little emails that should have separate subject lines? To some extent, that requires talking to the people you're communicating with. Most of my teachers tend to prefer one big email, having everything all together. But a couple of people have said they would prefer to have things separately. So if I'm just writing to those people about various different things, then I will send them separate emails with separate subject lines. But if I'm communicating with the staff as a whole, I'll send them a longer email, and I'll show you in a minute how I do that. If you are sending a big email, use headings to help people find their way around, and highlight key points so that it's not just a block of text. I tend to do that with colour, and again, you'll see an example in a minute. Make your emails easy for other people to navigate. It might take you an extra few seconds to do something that then will save everybody who's receiving that email 2 or 3 minutes of their lives. That all adds up. So here are some examples of things that you can do. Don't make them read between the lines. Tell them exactly what you want them to do and by when, for example. Yeah, so be explicit about what kind of reply you need and when. So for example, if I want teachers to tell me that they have received information about a timetable change, I say to them, okay, when you see this, reply with fine. If I want them to do something, like to add some information to a document or something, I'll say, once you're done, reply with done. I don't need to read an essay, they don't need to write an essay. All I need to know is that it's been acknowledged, it's done, it's 4 letters, we're finished. And then I should be able to see a stream below my email that says done, 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 question, which I deal with, done, 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 done. Makes my life easier, it makes their lives easier. So be really explicit about that kind of thing. If you want them to access another document, that's not an attachment. So for example, we do a lot of stuff on Google Drive, include the bloody links for them. Don't make them go off and hunt for it themselves. That 30 seconds that it takes for you to add a link, that is like, you know, cumulative across your whole staff of 20 teachers. That is an hour that you've just saved them. Be kind to them. I think that's all the tips. Yes. So here's an example. So this was at the beginning of the year. We have one list in our school of all of the Zoom IDs that the teachers create their own Zoom IDs for this year. And then we have a master list so that if a student has a problem, the office can access it. If we're going in to observe, we can access it. We don't need to go and contact the teacher individually. If somebody's doing cover, they can access the master list as well. So this was at the beginning of the year. You can see that this is a nice short email. My subject line says documents to check plus creating Zoom IDs. They know exactly what's in it. They can find this again afterwards. I've given them the list of the documents that they need to cross-check their timetable against. I always get them to cross-check things as well, because it doesn't matter how many times I do it, they can find the mistakes faster than I can. And it gives them exact information about what I want them to do. So create meetings for all of your Zoom classes on Friday the 18th, make sure they recur, so you never have to do it. I'm telling them why. Add the ID and the password to the Zoom ID document. I did not include a link here, which is bad. And when you've added all of them, reply to this email, say fine if it's all complete, list any problems. If not, be as clear as possible. And I've also explicitly told them, don't send the email separately. I want to keep it all in one thread. So I'm telling them exactly what I want from them. I know that might seem like micromanaging, but oh my God, since I started doing that, it's made my life so much easier, and nobody's complained that I'm doing that. So I think it's good, as I said at the beginning, clearer communication. This is what I want from you. This is what I need from you. You know when you've finished it. Like, they know when they've sent the message that says fine, they can forget about it. Here's another example. Again, you're not supposed to be able to read this email. But this was an email that I sent at the end of August for all of our teachers, so new and returning teachers. So they've got a very clear subject line, including when I want them to reply by. So they know that they don't need to open it until the 6th of September if they don't have time, for example, or if they're on holiday. They can see that from the subject line immediately. You can see it's a big email, but you can see I've got headings in there. One of the headings specifically says new teachers, so that returning teachers know that they don't need to bother with that section. They've got all of the documents attached underneath, and they've got highlighting in blue that picks out the keywords of each section, so they can find, you know, they can skim through the email and go, these are the sections, and read the bits that are relevant to them. If I have teachers, you know, if I send an email where I want different people to do different things, then I'll highlight their names in blue like this, so they can find the bits that are relevant to them. And you can see that I've included the links to all of the documents that they need as well. So that's a couple of examples of those emails. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a chance to read this, but this is about keeping track of documents that you've created or set. So have a look at that. This reverse order date thing has changed my life. Every document that I make that isn't on something like Google Drive has a date on it, so that when I send it out, we always know who has which version. Please, please, please don't use bloody numbers as versions, because people get lost with it. Put a date in it and change the date every time you change it. That means it's really, really easy to keep track of what you're doing. If you set a deadline, write it down somewhere and follow up on it and be consistent about that. If you are lax with deadlines, then why should your students / teachers follow, you know, why should they have to stick to deadlines if you don't do it? And don't, this is something I used to do. I've got much better at it now. I don't do it now. If people don't meet a deadline, don't write to everybody, because if you're the person who's met that deadline, it's really annoying to waste your time reading an email or a message that says, why haven't you followed it up? And that's quite frustrating, and it builds quite a negative feeling. So only follow up with people who don't meet the deadline. If you find that you've got somebody who's consistently not meeting deadlines, speak to them separately and talk to them about the effect that has. Give them some feedback. That's the next part, I think. Yes. So I'm going to show you a model for giving feedback. This can be talking about, it can be talking to students, like feedback on behaviour in the classroom. It can be feedback after observations. It can be feedback on things like not completing admin or not meeting deadlines. This is a model from a website called Manager Tools, and I found it a really useful way of thinking about my feedback. So here's some wording you could use. I'll give you an example in a minute. So the first thing to remember is that feedback isn't always negative. So the first question is, can I give you some feedback? If the other person says no, they're not in a suitable place to receive it. You are wasting your time if you continue the conversation. If they say no, ask them, can we arrange a good time to do this? Okay, and talk to them about it. If they say yes, then describe their exact behaviour. So, for example, when you don't meet the deadlines that I set, tell them the impact. It means that I have to spend extra time following up with you. This takes, for example, this takes about 30 minutes every week for me. What can you do about this? Get the other person to come up with the solution as much as possible. Try not to tell them what they're going to do. If they don't have any ideas, then yes, of course, you can suggest them, but it's always better if the other person suggests what's going to happen next. Or you can say, I've got 3 possible ideas. Which one or ones are you going to use? But give them the chance to suggest what they're going to do first. If it's positive feedback, can I give you some feedback? Yes. When you complete the standby form for me, it makes my job so much easier because it means that I can complete overtime very quickly every month. Thank you very much for doing that. Keep it up. That's some feedback that I gave a couple of days ago. And the teacher said to me, but I'm just doing my job. I said, I wish all teachers thought that. So that's part of the feedback model. It's really important that you talk about behaviour and actions and not personality. Not you are always late, but your replies are always late. Tiny shift, big difference. Make sure also that you work out like what expectations you're holding people to, what expectations teachers are holding themselves to, what expectations students are holding themselves to. Are they actually realistic expectations? If not, you need to talk to people about managing those expectations. And make sure that you're boosting confidence and spotting strengths. It's really easy for the majority of your communication with another person to be negative, for like 90% of your communication to be negative, telling people off, asking for things. Aim for at least 50-50 as much as you can. Push positive communication as much as you can. When you're giving observation feedback, you should be looking at like 75 to 80% positive feedback and 20% negative feedback. If you just watched an utterly rubbish lesson, the other person doesn't need to know it was utterly rubbish. They need to know that they can improve. They need to know that these were all the positive things I saw. Here is the 1 or 2 things you can do that will make the biggest difference to your students. And then you arrange to go back and you do it gradually. Don't dump all the rubbish on them. It's like, it doesn't help them. Yeah, all it does is depress them and make them quit. Okay, so that leads on to compassionate communication. Okay. Ask questions. Don't assume what the other person is thinking or saying. Ask questions and let them speak. Be patient and supportive. Put your fingers over your lips to stop interrupting. Let the other person speak. Give them time. Provide training on your personal bugbears. Don't assume that other people know how to do it or know what they're doing. For example, 2 of my personal bugbears are people not using blind carbon copy and just randomly sharing all of your email addresses with other people, and people using reply all versus reply to me, especially when the other person has not used blind carbon copy. So these are things that I teach people how to do pretty quickly. Once they've done it once, I will say, did you know that this is a thing? And you'd be amazed that a lot of people don't know those things, for example. Another tip is to be on the receiving end of your own communication. So for example, if you have a group email list, put your own personal email into that group email list. That will soon make you realize quite how many emails you are sending. When you open your personal email and see a flood of emails, you will suddenly start sending a lot fewer emails, a lot fewer group emails. That made a huge difference when I started doing that. Record your own feedback after an observation and listen back to it and think, would I want to be on the receiving end of that feedback? One more that's not there, but another thing you can do is if you run meetings, you can record your own meetings and sit through them. Don't fast forward it, don't do anything else, sit through it the same way that your teachers have to, for example. Okay, and the final big point that I think comes from all of this is be a learning communicator. So if you've had particularly successful communication or particularly unsuccessful communication, reflect on why, reflect on, what made that successful? How did you approach the communication? What made it unsuccessful? What were the kind of key points where you could have made a different decision that would have made that communication more successful? Seek out feedback. The same as you do with teaching. Don't assume that your communication is great. Occasionally, if you're a manager or if you're a trainer, ask people, how is my observation feedback? How could I improve it? What could I do differently? How are my meetings? How could I make them more succinct and less dull, basically? And then choose, the same as you do with your teaching, choose an area to work on with your communication and then work on it. If your area to work on is not interrupting people as much, every time you're speaking to people, really think about, notice when you're interrupting, you put your fingers on your lips, see what happens. A lot of the tips that I've shared with you are things that I've learned over the last 5 years because somebody has given me feedback and they've said, this is the effect it has. For example, I had a dyslexic teacher who told me that every time I interrupted him, it made him not want to speak to me because I have a tendency to finish other people's sentences. And he said that that really disrupted his train of thought. And he taught me the trick about putting your fingers on your lips. It's made such a difference for me. And because I really then consciously thought about improving that. But the last thing is be kind to yourself and remember that we're all human and we do make mistakes with our communication sometimes. As long as we're not repeatedly making the same mistakes again and again and again, then it's fine. Don't beat yourself up if some communication went particularly wrong, the same as you do if if a lesson goes wrong. You shouldn't beat yourself up about that either. You should reflect on it, think about it. What can I change? How can I avoid that situation in the future? Exactly the same is the case with communication. That's the end of my presentation proper. I'm just going to do a tiny little plug at the end. If you like this kind of thing, if you want some ideas for reflection, please do buy my books. The teacher training book has reflection questions for observation feedback, for example, that you can use to think about. It has 5 tasks for spoken feedback, 5 tasks for written feedback. The other one is the ELT playbook one is more for new teachers, and then Richer Speaking has activities, ways of tweaking speaking activities. Thank you very much, Chris, for putting that in there. And the Richer Speaking is $1, so you can hopefully definitely afford that even when it's a bit rubbish, but thank you very much. That is the link again. I'll put that link in the chat. Yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you very much, everybody.
Wow, thank you.